In this video, we're going to go over the cutscene module. Now, the cutscene module is actually sort of a repurposing of the achievements module, which the achievements module is a very diverse demonstration of some basic interaction principles that you can use for various different use cases, the cutscene being one of them. So definitely check that module out and check out that video. So here we are, we've got our cutscene trigger object, the highlighted transparent blue area, where when the player enters that area, all we're basically doing is turning on a camera. So when we turn on the camera, it takes over the player camera and acts as a sort of cutscene. The yellow orb right there, the sphere, is just a representative of where the camera is at. So for example, if I come into this space right here, we turn on the trigger, and you can see we've basically created a cutscene. Now in Unity, you can see I've got my cutscene module dragged and dropped onto the stage, and we're just going to go over how to modify it real quick. So basically, again, this is just a reference for the camera. Obviously, you don't want that to be visible, or maybe you do want some object representing the camera visible. If you don't, just go ahead into the inspector when you've got the object selected for the camera marker, and just uncheck the mesh render. So again, that's just for testing when you're actually in world. Now the camera itself is right here. It's the parent object of the camera marker, and you can see where it's facing and everything. So you could put this wherever you want, but obviously if you want a cutscene that involves your player, you're going to want the trigger object that turns on the camera to be in the area that you want recorded. Anyway, so for example, this is the area where it turns on the camera. So you can scale that however you need that to be for whatever purpose you need it for. This entire area, when the player walks into it, will trigger the camera. Now, of course, the camera itself can be moved, but you just want to make sure that it's actually seeing the player or whatever it is that you want it to see when it gets turned on. And that's basically it. Now, if we look under the hood, just to get an idea of how this works, how this is a representation or a use case of the achievements module, which is just basically a turning on and off of an object using animation. So for example, we've got our trigger object, our box. And when you're complete with the box as well, similar to the camera marker, you can just turn off the mesh render. But so we've got our trigger box, and as you can see, we've got a reactor attached to it. And that reactor has an on-enter trigger event and an on-exit trigger event, which is just basically called start camera and stop camera. And that just basically means that when the user walks into the area, we want to turn on the camera. When the user walks out of that area, we want to turn off the camera. And we do that by setting a variable, same as we do with the achievements module. So if we look at the camera itself, we can see that it has an animation. And we can see that in the inspector, the camera is off. So if we play the animation, you can see that the camera turns on. So that's essentially what we're doing to create a cutscene effect. And in the animator, we've got a parameter attached to it for on. And that's just a Boolean. You create one by selecting this drop-down menu. We're not going to get into details of all these other features, but it's just a Boolean, which means that it's a true or false value. So if we turn it on, this is defaulting to true. If we turn it off, it's defaulting to false. Now we can see in the animator that we've got our new state here, which is basically our default state where the camera is off. And then we've got a transition to our start camera animation. So if I go back to the animation that's attached to the camera, you can see start camera, that's the name of the animation, and if it plays, it turns the camera on. So these arrows represent the transition from one state to the next, so from the default to the start camera animation. And if I click on it, you can see that we have a condition for on, our parameter, being true. If the on parameter is true, then it plays that animation. And then we've also got the reverse, a transition coming back to our default state to turn the camera off. But in that one, the transition requires that condition of the on parameter to be false. Now the trigger itself, the trigger object, has a reactor again, which basically has two events that we set up. one when the user enters our trigger area, one when they exit our trigger area. And all we've done is we've basically said when the user enters the trigger, set the value of the parameter on the camera object to true. And we do that by dragging and dropping our camera that has our animation, and then we define the parameter that we want to modify. We select the value type. In this instance, we're just focusing on the Boolean, which is a true or false, and we set the value to true. Now we're basically doing the same exact thing with an on-exit trigger in the reactor, except this time we're setting the value of on to false. And that's basically how the cutscene works, to turn on and off the camera when you enter that space, and that's how you customize and modify it. Don't forget to check out the achievements module and the associated videos to give you a bit more clarity about how all this stuff works and can be repurposed for different use cases.